In this video, I want to talk about the role of governments in development. Governance, not government. We're closely related, of course. But we're not simply talking about the role of government in development, which we are, but we're also talking about the quality of the governance that's provided by government. And much of the discussion we're going to have surrounds the question of what lessons do we take from the so-called Asian tigers. The Asian tigers are a bunch of countries in East Asia. Japan after World War II is not exactly one of them because it was industrialized before World War II but was destroyed by World War II. But South Korea, Taiwan in particular, Singapore, and some other countries in Southeast Asia. And basically, Korea is a good example. In 1950, roughly at the time of the Korean War, South Korea was no wealthier or no more economically developed than most of sub-Saharan Africa. And now, of course, 70 years later, South Korea I think has the 11th largest GDP in the world and has a per capita GDP rivaling that of the wealthiest countries in the world. And so the question is, what did the South Koreans, the Taiwanese, and so on, what did they do right that people in other countries did not? And one set of answers has to do with the standard answer is they focused on the global market. What was called export-led development or export-led growth. They sold stuff. They didn't protect their markets. They sold stuff. But there's a revision of that school of thought that really focuses on the role that their governments played and the quality of governance in those countries. And that's what I want to talk about in this lecture. So the term was coined the developmental state. In other words, a state, a government that was focused on and very good at promoting economic development. So the idea is it's a mixture of two things. Yes, these countries were oriented towards exports. They were oriented towards the global market. They welcomed the global market rather than resisting it. But the argument is they were able to succeed at that because they had a strong autonomous state or a strong autonomous government. And it was able to do the following things. First, to accrue capital and allocate it towards key sectors. This is what's sometimes called industrial policies. So, for example, the ability to gather up through taxation, collect a lot of money, and to invest it in sectors that really need a lot of capital investment at a scale with which they can then compete with the big players in the world. Those policies were in many cases implemented by bureaucracies that, because their bureaucracies were insulated from electoral pressures, right? They were stuck inside the executive branch, not elected in the next election, and so they were able to do the things that they thought were necessary and were able to enact the policies that they thought were the best ones. And the aim in this developmental state is to aim for so-called leading economic sectors, those sectors of an economy that not only produce big returns on investment, but have a spillover effect into the broader economy. So, we'll talk about that in a minute. But we're talking things nowadays, right? Leading sector are things like information technology, software, and so on, or finance. Manufacturing electric cars looks like it's going to be a leading sector moving into the future. Big battles over who's going to drive that industry or who's going to get, I don't want to say control, but where that industry is going to take place, because there's a sense that wherever the electric cars are getting made, lots of other good things are going to follow from them. Moreover, this developmental state promoted exports, and some people really focused on this last point, limited labor unrest, so that production stayed steady. The price of labor remained modest, and again, there was no disruption from strikes and things like that. Related to this then, in this question of governance, is the problem of corruption. The autonomous state is only autonomous if it can't be corrupted by economic actors, if it's not corrupt. Corruption, in some people's views, is a fundamental problem undermining economic development. Why? Well, because one of the things that corruption does most fundamentally is it undermines competition, right? The reason I go and bribe some government official, right, is to get that government official to make life difficult for my competitors so that I don't have to compete with them anymore. I can sell things at high prices or buy things at low prices. Corruption also puts profits at risk. To the extent that there's corruption in a country, then if I make a lot of money in my business, I'm always afraid that someone, through corrupt law enforcement or something else, is going to come take it from me. We see this problem a lot in the former Soviet Union, but not only in the former Soviet Union. So it puts profits at risk. And if people's profits are at risk, they're going to be much less likely to invest and to work hard and so on. More particularly, it leads to what we call capital flight, which is if I am lucky enough to make a lot of money, I don't want to keep it somewhere where some government bureaucrat or crooked government official or crooked law enforcement official might come along and say, hey, why don't you give me a bunch of your money? Instead, what I do is I'll move it into offshore banks. I do what all great corrupt people around the world do. I buy apartments in London and New York. I buy football or soccer teams in various European countries. I buy real estate on the French Riviera, and so on. Moreover, corruption deters foreign investment. International investors do not want to invest money in places where they're not going to be able to get a fair shake. So corruption's a huge problem. Related to this, then, is the importance of strong regulation. There was a view, sort of an extreme free market view, says, anything the state does is bad, just get the state out of the way. What people have clearly come to realize is that while too much of government intervention can be a bad thing, there are some crucial tasks that the state has to be able to perform effectively. And among them are enforcement of contracts. Getting back to this question of corruption, if you and I make a deal and you don't follow through on the deal, I've got to be able to go to court and get a fair shake in court so that contracts have to be followed. The prevention of fraud. And a good example of that is the question of insider trading in stock markets. Stock markets are incredibly important for allocating capital, right? We think of them just as places where rich people get richer, but they also play this role of allocating money into places where people think it's going to be able to have a big return on investment. And the idea then is that capital gets allocated to the places where it can most effectively be used. That's the magic of stock markets. The problem is that magic doesn't work very well if there's insider trading, right? And so we don't necessarily think about it, but one reason the American stock markets work so well is that we have a very competent and very alert Securities and Exchange Commission that throws people in jail, monitors situations and throws people in jail if they're found to be manipulating the stock market. Similarly, the competitiveness of public tenders. In any country, a big chunk of the economy is government spending, and so when the government is going to buy something, the process for competing to be the seller of that good has to be fair and open and so on. So all of these things are important, and all of them are aspects of how a government works. So in recent years, and by recent years I mean the past 25 years or so, foreign aid, especially aid given by the World Bank, has increasingly focused on strengthening the state, on what the World Bank tended to call capacity building programs that help bureaucracies work more effectively. For example, tax collection, right? Governments that can't collect taxes can't do much of anything else. So tax collection's been a big focus. Justice reform, right? That question of are contracts enforceable and will they be enforced fairly? Effective regulation. You want regulation to be as simple as possible, as straightforward as possible, and to do the things it's supposed to do. So in a lot of post-communist Europe, I think about Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and so on, after the fall of communism, this kind of aid, given not only by the World Bank, but a lot of it was given by the European Union, was really seen as transformative. I think it's safe to say that in much of the rest of the world, promoting good governance, promoting capacity building, and so on, while there's been a lot of emphasis on it, it's probably been less successful. Another critique or another problem with this focus on the developmental state is the question of democracy. There are those who are going to say that, those Asian tigers succeeded, but to a large part they succeeded because they were authoritarian. You get to the question of keeping labor under control. South Korea was essentially an authoritarian state until well after its economic boom really took off. The same thing was true of Taiwan. They suppressed labor unions. And so there's important aspects of this in which people are going to say, wait a second, are you really advocating authoritarianism as a means to economic development? Because in fact, across the world, the correlation between authoritarianism and economic development is not a very good one. But so this is a big question as well, is exactly what's the relationship between the developmental state and democracy. A lot of people now are focused on China. China is an authoritarian state that also really has taken on this role of the developmental state, and of course, so far, it has been a smashing success for China. Is that a sign that democracy is not needed for development, or even that it might hurt development? Sorry for the typo. This is a big question that people debate. But at least in the short term, China believes, and a lot of people seem to think it's right, that it's found a solution to push development without democracy and on China's own terms. Now, China is so big that it's possible that there are some options open to it that aren't open to others, but it does seem that some people are going to learn the lesson that maybe democracy is not needed. Now, one of the reasons why countries like the United States supported opening up to Chinese investment and Chinese sales and exports and so on is the argument that that even if democracy doesn't lead to economic development will lead to democracy. I think what's happened in China over the last 20 years has raised a lot of doubts about that. China has developed quite extensively economically, and it seems to have become less democratic, not more. So this is one of the real big issues for the future, not only for the future of China, but for the lessons that other people learn from it.